Just, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Just to refer back to your Iran effect, there's been recent speculation, both politically and in the media, about Iran, given its status in the Middle East and the power that it yields compared to Afghanistan or Iraq, for example. How honestly realistic do you think a military strike against Iran by the US is likely to happen?
Well, we have no idea what planning is going on within the small and by now pretty desperate clique that is barely holding on to power in Washington. And if history is any guide, they have not informed British intelligence or their favorite allies about what they're planning, if they even know. So we really don't know. I mean, there's one of the reasons for governments, the main reason for government secrecy, you look through, study declassified documents, and you do learn that there is a security interest all the way through. But primarily it's security against the domestic enemy. They don't want their own population to know what they're up to, because if people did know what they're up to, chances are that they'd act and act in a dedicated fashion to prevent it. So therefore you have to keep planning secret from the population, the domestic enemy. And that's what's happening now. We do not know the plans. They're certainly issuing threats very publicly and openly, not only the words, but even the actions. So for example, the last couple of years, the United States has provided to Israel over 100 advanced jet bombers, openly advertised as capable of bombing Iran and returning. I don't think a word about that has been published in the United States, but it's public information. You can read it in the Israeli press. You can read it in the military journals. Certainly, Iranian intelligence knows it. Israel already has, according to its own estimate, air and armored forces that are larger and technologically more advanced than any NATO power other than the United States. It's not because Israel is capable of doing that. It's because by now it's virtually an offshoot of the United States, particularly a military and high-tech offshoot. Well, that's a serious warning to Iran. Furthermore, deploying major naval forces in the Gulf, right offshore from Iran, is an obvious threat. I mean, if Iran was deploying major naval forces in the English Channel or the Caribbean, you can bet that the United States and London would be pretty upset about it. In fact, they'd go to war. Capturing Iranian officials in northern Iraq, that's a provocation. The United States is almost certainly, we can't prove it, but the evidence is pretty strong, carrying out, is supporting secessionist groups, terrorist groups, in fact, in Iran. Recently there was an attack from Baluchi-based, Pakistani-based terrorists. Azeri groups are being supported, others. All that's very provocative. That's all over and above the overt threat. I should say that if anyone cares, the overt threats to Iran are a crime. They're a major violation of the United Nations Charter, which outlaws the threat or use of force in international affairs. Threat of force is a violation of the Charter. It's a violation of law. In outlaw states like the United States and Britain, where law doesn't matter much, that's not, there's very little comment on that. But definitely the threats are there, and all of this could lead to just an accidental war. The case of the captured British sailors is an example. There are no territorial boundaries in the Gulf that mean anything. You have naval forces there right next door to Iran. Yeah, you're likely to have an accident, and an accident can easily escalate and explode. So yes, there is a threat of war. The question that we really should be asking, I think, is there a way to avert it? Actually, there is. A very simple way. You can't prove that it would work, but it's certainly a good start. turn the United States and Iran into functioning democratic societies. You can tell me about Britain, where I don't know the details, but I know them about the United States and Iran, and you can find them out too. Public opinion in the United States and Iran is very carefully monitored by the leading institution in the world that monitors public opinion. The program on international policy attitudes at the University of Maryland, you can find it on the internet. They did a careful study of Iranian and U.S. opinion on nuclear issues. And very interestingly, they're virtually identical. In both countries, there's an overwhelming majority. In the United States, it's 82% that think that all nuclear weapons should be abolished. What that means is that the nuclear states, like the United States and Britain, should observe their legal responsibility, and it is a legal responsibility determined by the World Court, to take good faith efforts to eliminate nuclear weapons, and not to increase their nuclear capacity as the U.S. and Britain are now doing, but to move to eliminate them. Well, that's supported by 82% of the population in the United States, comparable figures in Iran. If that can't be achieved, very large majorities in both countries think that the Middle East, the entire Middle East, should be turned into a nuclear weapons-free zone. That means Iran, Israel, and U.S. and perhaps British forces deployed in the region should not have any nuclear weapons capacity whatsoever. Okay, that would be a step forward. 75% of Americans think that all threats against Iran should be dropped, and the United States should enter into diplomatic relations with Iran. Incidentally, they think the same thing about Cuba. Again, overwhelming majorities of Iranians and Americans think that Iran should have the right to produce nuclear energy, just as every signer of the Non-Proliferation Treaty does, but should not have nuclear weapons. Well, that's the framework for an agreement. All that would be necessary is to turn these countries, and I suspect the same is true in Britain, you can figure that out, but to change these two countries so that they become functioning democracies. That is, societies in which overwhelming majority of public opinion can have an influence on policy. Well, let's even take something weaker. Countries in which an overwhelming majority of public opinion can be reported in the media. As far as I'm aware, none of this has ever even been reported, though it's obviously highly pertinent, and in real democratic societies would be very significant. It's there. You can find it on the internet. You can find it in, dissident literature. I've written about it. I give talks about it. Other people do, but that's kind of on the margins. Try to find it in the mainstream press. Do an internet search. I don't think you will. Nobody's found it. Well, that's we certainly ought to be able to do something to make our own societies functioning democracies. To claim that we can't do that is absurd. Can we do anything to help Iran become a functioning democracy? The answer is yes, we can. We could listen to the pleas of the very courageous Iranian reformers and democracy activists who are pleading with the United States to call off the threats. That's people like Akbar Ganji or Shirin Ebadi and the labor activists, people you don't hear about, but some of the most important and courageous of them. They're saying drop the threats. And they understand, for a good reason, which we can all figure out. When you threaten a government, it's going to react. You threaten a government with attack and destruction, it's called politely regime change. What are they going to do? Especially when the threat is very credible. I mean, it's not like, say, Luxembourg issuing the threat. This is the world's superpower and acting to make the threat very visible, like naval deployments in the Gulf. How do they react? We know. We know how our own governments react when there are much more mild threats. You react with repression. And in the reactionary theocracy that dominates Iran, they react with severe repression.